think it would be wrong to claim that no cities are building motorways still through their centres. It is happening in many parts of the world, but it is interesting to look at those visionary cities that are starting to look at different ways of doing things. San Francisco is a very good example. 2 of their motorways were damaged in the earthquake in 1989, and the people of San Francisco eventually voted to deconstruct or demolish these motorways and not replace them. So the Embarcadero Freeway, which cut off San Francisco from its traditional pier and coastline and had led to the area becoming somewhat crime-ridden and definitely going downhill economically, the motorway was swept away and a tree-lined boulevard has replaced it with trams, cycle lanes, buses, and a really pleasant environment, and just shows you how turning conventional wisdom on its head by some of these more visionary, smarter cities has led to a much better outcome than we see here in Glasgow, with the prospect of yet another motorway being bulldozed into the centre. Go back to the 1950s in Glasgow, I think there was a very strong feeling that the way forward was, in a sense, the American model, that it was a brave new world of big roads that would cut through areas, big houses, the multi-storey flats, and that was going to be, if you like, a solution to the problem of congestion on the roads, a solution to the problem of slum housing, and it was going to take Glasgow forward towards the 21st century. Some people would argue that you need to build a big motorway to avoid the congestion in the centre of the city. And in a sense, if you look back in the 1960s, people thought that would be the answer. Genuinely they did. It would relieve congestion on the streets and free up the space for a more pleasant shopping and living environment. But of course the big problem is, as car ownership grows, you simply get more traffic. It's the traffic generation problem. So the motorway fills up, so there's pressure for more motorways, the traffic becomes gridlock. That affects the local economy as well as the environment. It's bad for public health. I think the reality is the more roads you build, the more traffic you get. Put simply, that's really what it comes down to in big cities like Glasgow. I think the idea of quality of life and living beside a motorway is contradictory. One of the most striking things that really doesn't get mentioned much even nowadays is the whole noise impact issue. You get a corridor miles wide along motorways, particularly where they're elevated. Noise that is intrusive. People may think they get used to it, but it disturbs their sleep patterns. It means they cannot enjoy peace and quiet. And it's partly the contradiction between the pleasant suburban life that some people can lead and drive into the centre of Glasgow and impose these impacts, these negative impacts on people who don't have such economic or social opportunity. So there's a basic injustice in there which is reinforced by the motorway. And when you look at the fact that getting on for 60% of households in Glasgow don't have a car, they do not have a car, I think the contrast is even starker. Why should a city like Glasgow, which has got one of the lowest rates of car ownership anywhere in Britain, be prioritising motorway building, which benefits the more affluent? There's something fundamentally wrong in that, and that issue of social justice and indeed environmental justice really should be at the heart of the debate about the M74 extension.
Various incarnations of M74 since it was first planned in the 1950s. What's currently being proposed by the Scottish Executive is a motorway that will go from the east end of Glasgow, near the Toll Cross area, traversing Rutherglen and Cambuslang, coming through the Gorbals, Govanhill, Eglinton Toll, and then at Kingston, where the Kingston Bridge feeds onto the M8. Originally it was proposed to be 8 lanes wide with 2 hard shoulders on either side. Given the outcry that's followed the proposal, they've reduced that now to 3 lanes on either side with a hard shoulder. So effectively still an 8-lane motorway. It'll come through the Eglinton Toll district next to Govanhill, 50 feet high, and carrying 110,000 cars a day minimum.
Since the Parliament's been set up in 1999, all the focus has been upon prioritising spending on public transport. I mean, at least that's what the policymakers say. But when we see what's actually happened in practice, we've seen a road building programme put in place of £1.2 billion, of which the M74 will make up at least £500 million worth of that. So while the rhetoric is very much about spending money on public transport, trying to encourage people to stop using their cars so much, what's actually happened has been continued and in fact increased spending on road building. And as we know, this will lead to more traffic and more pollution. It's doing absolutely the opposite of what Scottish Government is actually saying that we should be doing. Serious problems with climate change. Oil is going to start running out within the next 10 and 20 years. We've got rapid growth in road traffic. We're looking at another 30% growth in road traffic over the next 20 years. And so we think it's entirely daft that the largest transport project in Scotland is an elevated motorway being bulldozed through the centre of Scotland's largest city. The evidence we have from across Britain and worldwide is that when you build new roads, you generate new traffic. This is a well-observed impact of building new roads. And when you build a new road through a congested urban area like Glasgow, there's absolutely no doubt that this will increase traffic levels in the city. One of the problems with the M74 is there's never been any analysis of alternatives to road building here. There's never been any thorough study of what you could do by spending money on public transport measures, investing in facilities for walking and cycling, looking at transferring more road freight onto rail. None of that study's ever been done. All we've just gone ahead here is a business lobby campaign for more money on road building, and basically government's fallen over and just coughed up with the cash.
To be honest with you, the number of people that will benefit from this road, you could count them on your fingers in this city. You have a tiny quorum of people in the City Council and in the Chamber of Commerce, which are closely allied on this issue, who will benefit from it. Primarily, I imagine road haulage companies will benefit. The people that won't benefit are the working class people who live along the route of the motorway in Govanhill, the Gorbals, Rutherglen and Glen. Their children are going to suffer higher rates of asthma. Their children are going to die of cot deaths more frequently. These are proven and accepted facts. Not only that, but in the area of Rutherglen, where the soil is contaminated, I wouldn't be surprised if you saw a cancer blip in that area as a result of the chromium that's in the soil, a cancer-causing agent, which the construction of the motorway will kick up into the atmosphere.
This was all fenced off up until a couple of months ago. Well, now this is now 1st of December tomorrow, but up until about June this year, there was a big fence right around about this land, right up to these goalposts. Not the whole land, but right as far as where the kids are playing up there. And danger, toxic waste, contaminated land, keep out. It had already been covered over in some manner by South Lanarkshire Council because the ground investigation showing that to be very dangerous, that particular spot. As far as I know, in the last week or so, whenever they took the fences down, they just put topsoil on and says, aye, it's okay to play on, which I believe it might be, but it's not okay to build a motorway on. That's what they're going to do on the other side of the railway. I don't think these people all realise that the consequences of how their lives are going to change, especially when they're building the motorway. It's going to be a building site for about 3 or 4 years because of the scale of the project and getting across Glasgow Road there and getting across the railway line. A big shopping store. So this is the Glasgow-London railway line. You can see the chromium as it seeps out from the embankment there. It's seeping onto the line. That green, grey marking you see on the wall, that's it seeping out of the embankment and coming down. Southcroft Park is just the other side of the fence. And you would get that whenever the weather prevailed. And this is the one thing I'm worried about is how they're going to deal with this, because the railway's contaminated, Southcroft Park's contaminated. The people of Rutherglen are going to get a very big shock to the system when they start digging into this stuff, and the consequences that are I can't think about the health consequences of the people of Rutherglen. It frightens me, and I hope we can manage to put a stop to it.
I don't think anybody could argue that the road won't temporarily relieve congestion. Of course it will. If you build a motorway 100 feet wide over 5 miles into the centre of Glasgow, well, of course it's going to relieve some congestion. But at what price and for how long? And if you look at the official evidence, the amount of time saved is just a few minutes. This is for people who are car commuters who, by definition, are mostly from the more affluent end of society. So they're going to get the benefit of a few minutes quicker journey. What happens to the public transport that runs parallel? Where is the missed opportunity here for investment in improved buses, bus priority, improved rail services that would benefit a whole cross-section of society? So it is a dead-end route. It's a 1960s transport solution to a 21st century transport problem.
It'll definitely degrade an environment that, has already been degraded in some ways. We're standing just now on a gap site that has been left vacant since the 1960s in anticipation of the building of this road. And that was a planning decision taken by the City Council, which effectively has left the whole area of the city to blight. And if you look along the railway, which the M74 will shadow, you can find similar gap sites all the way along, either brownfield sites that used to be industrial units, factories, or the relics of slum clearance in the 1960s. So in the areas where slum clearance was most pressing, that were most affected by industry and industrial pollution, you've also had, for the last 40 years, gap sites which have lowered the tone of people's environment, have been left to blight, and have attracted rubbish, fly tipping and things like that. So areas which could have been turned into useful community amenities for the working class people round about them have effectively been a drain on the environment that those communities have had to face. Well, what could have been built here instead? I mean, there are a number of possibilities, but I think the answer to that question lies in the need of the community. What did the community need at the time of slum clearance, when this area of Devon Street was one of the most densely populated areas in the world? What wasn't needed was a large gap site that would attract fly tipping, which would be left vacant and have no use and be an eyesore for the people living round about it. We could have built a park here that would have been, you know, for people in their 40s now, a place of childhood memories. We could have built a school here in a large area of green space where children could have had, you know, pitches and sports facilities. We could have built a nursery here. We could have built any number of community facilities here. But instead, for the cost, for the mad scheme that a council has dreamt up, we've had none of these things. Instead of a plus, we've had a minus for the community.